Should pastors develop their own personal brand in addition to their church's brand? Well, in this conversation, we're going to unpack some of the reasons why you should, why you shouldn't, and if you decide to do it, some of the tips on how to do it the right way. Let's do it. Well, hey guys, I'm Thomas.
And I'm Ian.
And today we are talking about pastoral branding and comparing that with church branding and whether it's appropriate or not. And then want to give you some keys on, if it is appropriate, how you might use that to grow your church, building a pastoral brand. So should be a good, interesting conversation, I think, Ian. It's something we've never talked about here in 200 and some odd episodes of the Reach Right podcast. You kind of run out of totally new topics. We'd take new angles on things we've talked about before, but I've never actually talked about this one before, about the difference between personal branding and church branding. Maybe if you're like me, like when you first hear this topic, that might be a little bit off-putting to you. Just the idea of being building my personal brand as a pastor. And I totally get it. If that's the purpose of it, is to make your own name famous or, to sell books or whatever it would be, then I get why that's off-putting. I know as a pastor myself, that was always something I wanted to push back on and not make my face the main face of our church website and do those kinds of things. But there are a lot of, I'm sure you see these, Ian, there's a lot of churches that we help where the pastor is the main entity, right? Like you get on there and like it's kind of an old joke that we had back in the day. We've been helping churches with websites since 2006. So this is back then we would run into pastors that would have these flash walkout videos and it would be all about them descending on clouds and all crazy stuff.
Lightning bolts coming from behind them and all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
So I don't know. What are your thoughts, Ian? Do you think churches, do you think it's appropriate for pastors to focus on a personal brand?
I think the way I would answer that is I don't think it's always inappropriate. And I think it depends on the church. And actually what comes to mind for me is my church, Thomas, which we refer to, and I've been a part of smaller churches. I've pastored with you at smaller churches. And then for years now, my family and we've been members at what is known as a mega-sized church. Now, it made me think of our pastor. My pastor's name is Joe Champion. Even with a name like that, you would think they would have their own brand. I always jokingly say if he wasn't pastoring, it sounds like he'd have his own car dealership, Round Rock Champion Auto or whatever it would be. And but no, a part of the big draw that caused our church to grow over the years was our pastor's preaching and personality. Just was a part of it, not all of it. So it did, I think, kind of naturally happen for our pastor to develop their own brand. Now, our pastor has written a few solo books and things like that, and travels, speaks at other churches, conferences, and those things, but has never separated himself to a degree to where he's not a part of our overall church's brand. So it made me think of my church, made me think of how it's something that naturally happened with our type of pastor. And I think some of the way I'll answer that question, and as we'll dig into this, depends on the kind of pastor that you are, depends on the kind of church that you are. But it is definitely an interesting topic to dig through. So, yes.
I remember when we first moved to Austin, we were planting a church, and you were part of that, Ian. I remember seeing your pastor and his wife and their pearly whites up on the up on billboards driving down I-35 there, and I remember seeing that. So obviously that personal brand has been there, and it's something that works there. I think the downside to it is that, especially for, I've pastored multiple churches, right? It works better if you're going to be at one church for 50 years or something like that as a pastor. But had I made the mistake, I think, in my case, of fully making my last church that I pastored in Madison about my brand and me and who I am. I don't think that's not what you guys are doing there either.
No,
but the more it was about me, the harder that transition is when I'm not there anymore. Like
Right.
what is the church
Correct.
if the main brand part of it goes away?
That's
what is
true.
this church anyway? And I think every mega church has to deal with that, right? That's kind of the challenge that every founder has. Like you're watching with the debacle that's happened at Gateway Church and Robert Morris having to resign over some of those allegations that he had. What's left? His son had to resign too because of it, and like that church can't establish. We watched it happen with Mark Driscoll and what happened at Mars Hill because he was the brand behind it. He was the cussing pastor, as people would refer to him then, and it just everything kind of fell apart. And so there's a definite downside to it, especially when our sin becomes involved with it. But I'm with you. I think that it's not necessarily wrong. I think that there's a lot of people that will come to faith because they feel an affinity with a certain pastor and a brand that he or she may have online or in every other thing that they do. So but I guess we want to give some tips, I guess, on how to build that responsibly, how to do that for a typical church. I think that for the average church, which is under 100 people, it's one thing to try to establish a brand, but like you and I see a lot of churches out there that are smaller churches that are trying to do that pastoral brand thing. And it just feels like striving sometimes, right? Like we're just, it's almost off-putting because, there's like 20 people that are at the church and, everything has got their face on it. And it's the website is, Pastor Brown Ministries or whatever it is. And it's just like when that's the whole brand, I think it misses an opportunity. So I guess the theme of this episode is going to be like, we think it's okay in certain kind of context to kind of build a pastoral brand in addition to your church's brand. I think never separate. It's not it's in addition to, not in replacement of your church brand. Right. So I think it has, like Stephen Furtick and Elevation Church go hand in hand, and Craig Rochelle and Life Church go hand in hand. Right. So it's these two things together. So that's okay. But if it was only Stephen Furtick's Ministries, like I think most people can't name what Joel Osteen's church is, right? Do you know what I'm not remembering it. What is his church called?
It's funny that I have to also think of that. Is it it's Lakewood?
Lakewood, that's what it is. Yeah,
I think so.
So it's less connected, right? That's what I'm getting at. So I think that's more personality driven and less connected to the actual church itself there. So anyway, that's what we're getting at. So let's give some tips. Why don't you go first on how to establish a responsible one?
I'm going to dig into it. You're right. I'll go first. One thing I was going to say, the good news is these that we're going to give here, as you're deciding if it makes sense for you, the good news is a lot of these things you need to carry out to develop a pastoral brand are going to be the same as what you would do with developing your church's brand. So the good news is it's not something that veers too far, because this first one starts with having core values and your mission. And again, so I think that a pastor's core values and their mission should be falling in line with what their church's is. Obviously, it should be to lead people to what the Lord is doing there. But I think that's step number one is core values. What is your mission as a pastor? What is your mission as a church? How do those two things align? Yeah. No,
I think that's good stuff. I think, really getting those, your core value and missions, I think that they need to be one and the same. Like if it's totally different from your church's core value and mission, you're probably not at the right church, I would say. So just helping to establish that, I think, is good. What do you think? I don't know if this is one of the ones we'll talk about. What do you think about pastors having their own websites, like in addition to the church website? Is that something
we've
that's
seen
healthy,
a lot
do you think?
We've seen a lot of it. I will tell you this: I see a lot less of it these days compared to when you and I first started working with church websites and other digital marketing and church branding back in 2006. I see less and less of it as time goes on. And again, it's one of those things where I don't necessarily think it's wrong if your pastor is also a known evangelist or speaker and they have a type of ministry that it doesn't clash with your church's ministry, but it brings value to other churches. It brings value to other ministry leaders. That they can help develop other ministry leaders of other churches and other pastors, and makes sense for them to travel and speak at times, then they may need one. They may need one if they are called to write numerous books as well, and these types of things. So so I think it is case by case, I think, is what we keep coming back to here. But so the answer is, I think it can make sense, but I think it's one of those things to where it has to be to a certain degree and has to be identified that is the will of God for your pastor, and that they can carry that out to where it makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. I think and I know we're kind of veering off the list of our keys that we're doing here, but I think that for pastoral branding, there's some advantages. I think, like, obviously your pastor is going to have their own social media profiles and those kinds of things, right? They'll have a personal one that they use, and that's obviously fine. There's not an issue with them using Facebook or Instagram for themselves. I find that one of the most compelling arguments for having a pastoral brand and not just a church brand is that it's easier to reach people personally than it is as an organization. So I look at, like, even Reach Right. We put out content on social media. Yeah. Our social media team does a great job with that. And I have found, though, that if I were to put out that same content on a personal thing, and as if it's coming from me as a real person specifically, it would get a lot of reach, especially on platforms like Instagram and Twitter or X. Like, nobody really engages with brands on X. They only engage with real people, it seems like, and that's what people are looking for on there. So there is a lot of advantage to those kinds of things. So anyway, I think that's something that I'm wrestling with as we're going through these. I'm like, well, it does make sense in that way, but again, it's something you have to have caution about. But back to our list, consistent messaging. So between the church, this is kind of similar to what you were saying, but between the church and your personal brand, that the message has to be consistent. Obviously, your pastoral theology can't be different from your church's official theology, right? Yeah. Those things have to be the same, and the things that matter to your church have to be the same thing that matter to you as the pastor of the church. So just making sure that you're consistent in those things and you're consistently putting it out there. I think that's a good way to build your pastoral brand. Yeah,
that's good. Next one here is community engagement. A little different here, but obviously, if you're a pastor, you should be engaged in your community. You should be accessible to people to a certain degree. Now, again, if I think of my pastor, and being at a part of a very large church, it sounds silly to even say, but even similar to like a celebrity, they're going to get approached by more people, in the grocery store, out and about, right? Whatever it would be. You should still be approachable. You should be engaged. And we're not just talking about while you're just out and about, have your personal time and all of that with your family and all of that and so on. But, when it comes to outreaches, community projects, whatever it would be, it is good if you're developing your own brand, if you will, as a pastor, or just even to be a pastor of a local church. If you're out and about and show that you care about the community and you're out in the community, that shows that you care. And it's not just a come to me, come to our church, come to hear me preach approach. It's not just that. So, Yeah,
good stuff. That's it. Yeah. Number 4 is utilizing digital platforms. We'll spend a little bit more time on this one here because it's
talked a little bit about it already with Instagram.
I did get into it a little bit. I've been thinking more, and kind of some things to add to this here. So this is something that we wrestled with here at Reach Right, is that we've found that we can get more traction on a personal brand than we can on a corporate brand or a church brand for your case there. We get more traction personally. So we have done a few little things. Like if you get onto our Reach Right website right now, and if you happen to be on this podcast episode on the Reach Right website, down at the bottom, you'll see my face pointing and saying, hey, something like, hey, we can help you if you want some help in this area. You'll see me on the side. You'll see a video of me. Yeah. And so it took every bit of will for me to allow our team to do this. I do
remember the struggle. Yeah.
It's not me. I don't want to do that, but we've just found that it was more valuable for us to do that. And we saw in the A/B testing that we got better results when my face pointed to the call to action that said, hey, do this. So we did kind of a personal brand there. So for your church, it is something that you do need to wrestle with. Again, we usually don't recommend that the pastor's face be the primary image on the website.
Right.
There are a few exceptions for that. But, even like, the one churches we mentioned, Elevation Church doesn't do this, and Life Church doesn't do this. They may have a video of Stephen Furtick or Craig Groeschel preaching, but it's not a big picture of him and his wife or something like that up there on the main image there. So we don't recommend that you do those kinds of things, but thinking through your digital platforms and having some space, and I would even recommend that maybe if you're not a good social media user as a pastor, maybe having someone from your team help you to create more social media content, not just for your church website, but for your personal social media as well. So if you aren't great at Instagram, having someone who is good at Instagram helping you kind of build that personal brand a little bit, I think it can help move the needle for you and your church as you kind of combine those two things together.
I don't have much to add there. I think this next one, it makes sense for every pastor, but especially if you are trying to develop your own brand or branch out a little bit, if that's even the right word to use, branch out, but is personal development. And I think this just means that every pastor should always be, developing as a leader, whether or not that's conference, keeping up with church trends and discipleship programs and books and those things, or just times. Obviously, I think taking a step back begins with prayer and being in the Word constantly. If you're not doing that, I think that also, if someone's staying close to the Lord and the mission of the local church that He's called you to as a pastor, then you're not going to veer off too much in developing your own brand. So staying rooted in that personal spiritual development will also help you, I think, understand what the Lord may be calling you to as far as your own brand. Yeah. So
next one is kind of how to navigate some of the challenges that are going to arise. So here's one of the things is that as you develop a personal brand, in addition to a church brand, you will get some of the attacks that maybe your church faces will come at you more personally. And I'm sure that just take a look at anything that's posted by some of these celebrity pastors that we see out there, and you take a look at the comments. And I imagine a lot of the bad ones are deleted already, but there's always people that are disagreeing and fighting you. And so you need to prepare yourself that as you become a little bit of the brand of your church, like that you will get more of the attacks on you. The challenges will come personally for you. And sometimes as you get really big, it comes for your family. It comes about things that are really inappropriate. Here at Reach Right, we have seen some of the most inappropriate comments and things that you could ever imagine. Like off the charts, like ridiculously sexual stuff and attacks about how we look and and this is just from a small, YouTube and social channels. We have, just over 10,000 subscribers. We're not a huge platform or anything.
We're still proud of that number.
We are. We just celebrated that big mark here. So
we did.
But it's something that you just need to prepare yourself for the reality that these things come with building a personal brand. You're going to start to get more of this stuff online. The way we handle it is, you and I, Ian, have relatively thick skin. I think that's something that
we've kind of learned over the years with what we've done. So
we've both had backgrounds in sales and some of those kinds of things and have been in ministry long enough that we can do it. But you do need to do your best to protect your brand when it comes that way. So be prolific deleters of comments when you can. Just getting rid of stuff that's negative out there. Don't pay it any mind, and just know that every flaw that you have, every thing that you misspeak, it's all going to be brought to people's attention again. So I will say this here too, is that one of the other advantages, like it's not all challenges. I think there's some real advantages to this. And I think you've been seeing this too, Ian, is that like when we have got more personal, like, us doing this podcast and, doing other videos and that kind of stuff, how often are you hearing from people that they've seen you before when you talk to them, right? They've watched you before, much like a pastor would maybe encounter people in a grocery store, and people will know them. This is one of the benefits of a personal brand is that people have a level of familiarity before they ever meet you for the first time.
It's a benefit. And it also is something, like you said, that you need to stay, it keeps you on your toes, right? So I've actually been surprised by some comments that I think that I'm just having a consultation to help church with their digital marketing strategy, and instead, I'm asked about something that we said here, whatever, or someone says they like me more because I talk less than you. I'm kidding. They don't say that. But no, it is funny. We get these comments, right? So no,
right.
No, I think that's good. And I think one thing I want to add to what you said too on this point is I think it's very important when these personal challenges can come, or these or just challenges in ministry. Make sure you're a pastor that's connected to other pastors, leaders, connected to your congregation. Don't be that lone ranger, because then the challenges, especially if you're branching out a bit with your own brand, they're going to be harder to navigate if you're not connected in unity there. And I think this last one, Thomas, you and I are both going to really love to land the plane on, because it's about maintaining integrity. And I think, again, unfortunately, and I know particularly you've shared this with me over the last couple of months, seeing the downfall of a lot of these key pastors and even people that we've followed and really loved their what they've done, their work in the Lord and everything, just having these horrible falls. I mean, you are especially if you are the type of pastor that's branching out on your own kind of brand, or you're a little more known, your integrity's, it's important for every pastor and believer, and someone who's just greeting people at the door. Your integrity is equally as important to God. But I think when you're putting yourself, when you're in this position or you're in this limelight, the fall could feel a lot bigger. So,
well,
and the effects of
is
it.
bigger.
The effects of it. That's exactly what, I was about to say.
Yeah, because I think that if you tie your church to your personal brand, then your personal integrity is synonymous with the church. So your church doesn't survive in a lot of cases if you do not keep integrity. And so maintaining that is vital. You have to actually have that in place. And that's what you were talking about before too, of just making sure you have other pastors you're doing it with, people that you can confess to, and people you can live out life with, and actually walk through these things. I think that would really help, and something that's so important to do. So good stuff. Anything else to add, Ian, as we wrap up on this episode?
No, this was a unique one, but hopefully it was encouraging to some. Maybe some pastors are kind of asking these questions right now to themselves. And
what would you say to the pastor? Like, if they're just, would your advice be in general, most pastors should kind of pursue a personal brand, or most shouldn't?
I'm going to answer it. You'd almost think I should be a politician. I'm going to answer it this way. I'm going to say, I think they should take a step back and, consider whether or not they should. So I think that they should be a little more critical of the decision. And I think in doing so, they'll learn whether or not they should. So I think it's a big question to ask and pursue God with, and do some soul searching, if you will. So I don't know if I can say, I would think just off the top of my head, Thomas, most probably shouldn't, but it really depends on where you're at. If I were to take a stab at it, I would say most probably shouldn't, but I'm not saying there isn't a good chunk of pastors that should not either. So,
I'd say probably that I think maybe consider dabbling with it, like maybe, start to use maybe your Twitter account, to kind of using more of that to promote some of the theology and things, or things that you're teaching about, and see how that goes, or play with some of that and dabble with it and see if it's working for you, if you're that kind of person. I think in the end, you're right, Ian, most probably won't, and probably would land on it doesn't really make sense for them. And I think we're healthier probably if we don't. But I think there are some people that are uniquely gifted in a way that they will reach people with the gospel when they do these kinds of things. And we're not necessarily against it at the same time.
Correct.
So anyway, I hope that's been helpful for you guys. If it has been, it would mean a lot to me. If you would hit the subscribe button, do those kinds of things. If you totally disagree with us, let us know about that down in the comments. Please just drop us, why are we wrong about no pastoral brand should ever be the case.
We said we have thick skin, right? Put us to the test.
You don't need to necessarily criticize the way we look or any of that kind of stuff. But we do have pretty thick skin. So do let us know if you disagree. Thanks for being a part of the Reach Right family, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.